Clash Royale used to be all about strategy, timing, and perfect placement to get the upper hand on your opponent, but then log bait was created and everything changed. At first, it seemed clever. You bait out your opponent's log, then punish them when they don't have an answer. But over time, log bait went from a skillful deck into the hyper bait spam fest it became today. Drop Goblin Barrel, Princess, Wall Breakers, Dart Goblin, anything that you can place to just get a tiny bit of chip damage and overwhelm your opponent. It started to feel less like strategy and more like spam. Today, Logbait has become one of the most polarizing decks in Clash Royale. Some people call it one of the most skillful decks in the game, but others say it's the reason Clash Royale isn't fun anymore. But before we go into why Logbait ruined Clash Royale, let's discuss the origins of the deck that haunts every player and how it developed into the hyperbait spam deck it became today. Logbait isn't something new. It's actually one of the first deck types to show up in the game back in 2017. The original Logbait was Princess, Goblin Gang, Inferno Tower, Goblin Barrel, Rocket, Log, Knight, and Ice Spirit. The strategy revolves around using multiple low-cost troops that can all be countered by the same spell, the infamous Log. Cards like Goblin Barrel, Princess, Goblin Gang, and Dart Goblin all force your opponents to use their log on at least one of them, and when they do, the others can do damage uncontested. It became famous really fast once players found out how effective it was. Within a few months, it exploded in use on ladder, in grand challenges, and in competitive play. OJ was the one that originally created and used the deck, and players like Surgical Goblin, one of the game's most famous pros, made it his signature deck and used it during the 2017 Kings Cup Tournament finals. And even just recently, Moonlight won the finals with a variation of the Logbait deck. It became so famous because at its core, it didn't need that much skill or smart placement. Once you throw your Goblin Barrel over the river or place your Princess at the bridge, your opponent has one of two choices, either log them out or take the damage. If they choose the first, well, you have the rest of your deck to deal the damage, and if they choose the second option, stack that over a couple more times and the damage is enough to bring down the tower. The only thing that made this deck respected is that on defense, you required a certain level of skill so you don't get 3-crowned on the first push. You had to know when to bait out the log, when to go all in, and how to keep the pressure without overcommitting. It was simply cheap, fast, and efficient, and in the hands of a good player, it looked unstoppable. But that reputation, however, didn't last forever. By 2018, players started to get frustrated, facing an endless barrage of Princesses and Goblin Barrels every match, complaining that every game against Logbait feels the same. It's an oppressive cycle of constant pressure with little room to breathe. It is seen as super spammy and really annoying, since you just can't do anything against like half of the pushes. Logbait's strength was that it could always threaten damage, even when you defended perfectly. A Princess might sneak a shot here, a Goblin stab, a random dart, or a spear by a Goblin. It's unavoidable. This defeat by chip damage playstyle became fatiguing to play against, so even though many respected the skill of a good Logbait player, a growing community started to label the deck as spam and no skill. Over the years, Logbait developed and went through a couple variations. Rascals, Valkyrie, and Tesla showed up in a few bait decks throughout the years, and around 2018 to 2019, counter cards like Barbarian Barrel, a spell that can also wipe goblins, entered the meta. This briefly kept the Logbait in check. In those periods, Logbait was less dominant and thus less hated. But this is one of the main problems of Logbait. No matter the current meta, the nerfs and the buffs, or the changes in the game mechanics, it always finds a way back to the top and remains a dominant deck. It has also evolved significantly with the addition of champions back in the day. A popular modern variant was Mighty Miner Logbait. Before Supercell recently made the switch back, you had something called the 3-card cycle, meaning when you have a champion card in the arena, you couldn't get it back in cycle until that champion is defeated. This effectively means that you can cycle your bait cards even faster, causing even more chip damage. And then came the era that we are in today, the era of hyperbait. And in my humble opinion, this is the deck that actually ruined Clash Royale.
Let's go. Yay. Gotcha.
Whoa! Yo, we connected the tower!
With evolutions like Evolved Goblin Barrel and Evolved Dart Goblin providing a huge damage output, some players crafted ultra-fast cycle decks containing multiple bait win conditions. This effectively meant Logbait on steroids. One famous build in 2023-2024 was the Hypno Bait deck, named after the streamer Hypno who popularized it, featuring Evolved Goblin Barrel, Wall Breakers, Goblin Gang, Princess, Dart Goblin, Ice Spirit, Cannon, with Evolved Valkyrie, as well as the Suspicious Bush making an appearance in some decks. This turned the deck from a somewhat skill-based play to just spam and pray. It's not even about baiting the log anymore. It's just about spamming Barrel, Wall Breakers, Bush, princess and anything you can to ultimately overwhelm your opponent and win. That's the strategy. Place cards and hope your chip damage turns into a victory. This deck had 3 or more cheap win conditions like barrel, wall breakers, sometimes bush, goblin drill, or skeleton barrel. You didn't even need a mini tank like knight anymore. Logbait had gone from a relatively balanced 3.3 elixir strategy to extreme low cost hypercycle spam, and the players' hatred for this archetype hit an all-time high as a result. Just recently, Molite won his final game in the World Finals against Sub using that same deck, which had Dart Goblin, Fire Spirit, Ghost, Wall Breakers, Vines, Goblin Barrel, Electro Spirit, and Zappies. The classic Logbait usually runs at about 3.3 average elixir, supported by a Knight or a Valkyrie. You also had an Inferno Tower for defense and a Rocket for a heavy punch. Hyperbait, however, removed any heavy building or troop from the mix entirely and replaced it with more swarm cards or an extra win condition so that your opponent's small spells can't keep up and there's simply too much incoming. In terms of gameplay, classic Logbait was often about patience and prediction, figuring out your opponent's rotation, maybe outcycling their log by 1 card, or tricking them by throwing the Goblin Barrel to an unexpected spot. Hyperbait, on the other hand, is about relentless aggression. You spam everything at the bridge every 10 seconds with cheap cards, knowing that if you keep cycling, eventually something will connect. This has led many to feel that Hyperbait crosses the line into broken. Despite the hate, Logbait wouldn't have thrived so long if it didn't have real strength. First, it's a versatile and strong on defense. Classic Logbait is known for its godly defense rating, with a building for tanks, swarm troops for distraction, and the ever-useful log to clear swarms. A well-played Logbait can defend any push. Second, it's basically constant chip damage no matter what the opponent does. Unlike heavy beatdown decks that might never touch the tower if completely stopped, Logbait virtually guarantees some damage over the course of a match. A princess locked in the opposite lane might get a few hundred HP off a tower if left alone. A single goblin from a barrel might stab the tower once or twice, even if the other goblins are dead. These small bits of chip damage add up, and Logbait always keeps the pressure on the opponent's tower health. And finally, it used to have some form of high skill requirement. You need to be mindful of your opponent's hand, their cycle, their other counter to your swarms, and how to deal with them to get the most value. And it also took some sort of smart placement if you wanted to defend heavy pushes successfully. But Hyperbait ruined all that in my opinion. Hyperbait ruined Clash Royale. This is a bold statement, but it encapsulates the frustration many players also feel. When we say a deck ruins the game, we usually means it warps the gameplay experience in a negative way, perhaps by making the matches feel one-dimensional, or by making other strategies that made the game so good in the first place feel worthless. When you carefully build a big push that should in theory get you the win, and your opponent defends perfectly with a Goblin Dart and a few spirits, and is able to spam wall breakers to get damage, this is essentially ruining the gameplay. Ideally, Clash Royale is about adaptive strategy and reacting to what your opponent does with a variety of tactics while trying to build your push. But against Logbait, matches often boil down to predicting the next barrel or princess. If you guess right, you get a positive trade. If you guess wrong, you eat damage. Some players enjoy this mind game, but many don't. Players have complained that against Hyperbait, you just can't do anything. You need multiple small spells just to get to their tower. In other words, you're forced to play their minigame of whack-a-mole instead of your deck's intended strategy. Well, you might be asking, what's the alternative? Supercell can't possibly nerf every card in the game, and you can't force players not to play a certain deck because at the end of the day, many defend it and even enjoy the unique challenges it brings. From a neutral standpoint, Logbait's existence has undoubtedly shaped Clash Royale's evolution and how the game is played, but at the same time, made many players' experience worse. At the end of the day, there's nothing we can really do. The Trivella was broken in FC25, the SMGs destroy people in Call of Duty, and the Logbait frustrates everyone in Clash Royale. That's just the nature of video games, so you might as well practice and learn how to defend it. And just like Logbait, many people claim that card evolutions also ruined the game, which is why I made a list of the most hated and the most loved EVOs that you can check out next.